Yeah, so I'm Bill Farquhar. As Rob said, I'm from the College of Health Sciences at the University of Delaware. And I was asked to just spend 5 to 10 minutes talking about new guidance from NIH on enhancing reproducibility. And of course, this is relevant for all NIH applications, particularly R01s. In terms of my background, I've had and currently have NIH funding. I have two multi-PI R01s. And I also have served for several years in an ad hoc fashion on study sections, and the last 2 years I've served as a standing member on the hypertension and microcirculation study section. So I review a lot of proposals, far too many, 3 times per year, and I've been doing that for a while. So Rob, you want me to just roll right into my spiel here?
Yes, roll right into your spiel. That would be great. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, great. So with NIH, with the new guidance from NIH, there are 4 areas of focus. And I'm working from a resource chart that was just recently provided to me by my SRO, and I'm happy to distribute this chart after the call today if that would be helpful to anyone. But anyway, the 4 areas of focus are: the first is the rigor of prior research. The second is scientific rigor. The third, biological variables, and the fourth, authentication. Now, I'm just going to go through each of these one at a time and give you my kind of 2 cents on what's important or what's not important. Now, in terms of the rigor of the prior research, this replaces the phrase scientific premise. So for a while now, a lot of us, when we would write our proposals, would really emphasize in bold or italicized or underline, the scientific premise. So now the phrase to use is rigor of prior research. And this, of course, is scoreable, so this will contribute to your score, so you have to do a good job here. And really, it's an opportunity. This should be included in both the significance section of your grant as well as the approach section of your grant. I'm referring to, of course, an R01. Really, this section is an opportunity to point out the strengths and weaknesses of the prior research. Also, it's important to point out the gaps in whatever the line of research is, and presumably you're going to write in such a way that your work is going to fill those gaps. So again, this is the rigor of the prior research. It replaces the term scientific premise, and it should be included in both the significance and the approach section. And as with all of these topics, you're really, my overarching comments, I guess, would be, grant writing is formulaic writing, and you really have to make it easy for the reviewers. So wherever you can use bullet points or bold something, I think that's worth doing, because reviewers get a big pile of grants, they get very tired, and you want to make it easy for the reviewers. But anyway, that's the first area of focus. The second area is referred to as scientific rigor. Now, this refers to the design of your proposal. And really, it's really to ensure robust and unbiased experimental design, methodology, analysis, and interpretation of data. So that should be kind of built into your project. Now, I would say this belongs in the approach section of the grant, and I think it is important to not only have this kind of built in, but really, I would recommend having a separate paragraph where you really highlight and summarize how you're addressing scientific rigor. And I think examples are, you want to state that you have plans to reduce bias. You want to state, assuming many of the experiments will be blinded, you want to state that, write that they'll be blinded. Presumably things will be randomized. You want to actually state that and highlight that. You want to really emphasize depending on the project, strict adherence to inclusion and exclusion criteria. So you really, not only should it be built into the grant, but it really should be set aside. And I'm just going to read a few sentences from a grant that multi-PI grant that Dave Edwards and I worked on that was funded. And this was focused on sodium restriction and vascular function. And we have, again, separate paragraphs, scientific rigor and reproducibility. We write, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, I'm just going to summarize a few things, but The proposed study design utilizes a rigorous approach in emphasizing randomized design to test the central hypothesis. Techniques are state-of-the-art, will follow strict adherence to the inclusion-exclusion criteria. Men and women will be recruited. Preliminary data support sex differences. And then we have several sentences where we specifically talk about how we're going to reduce variability. We'll reduce variability by testing women during the early follicular phase. We talk about our methodology, and it's robust. We give several examples here about rather than using clinic blood pressures, we'll use 24-hour. Rather than a single urine collection, we'll collect 24 hours of urine. And we give several different examples of how we're going to enhance the rigor of our proposal. And again, that's scorable, and reviewers look for that. Third point, and I'm almost done, and hopefully we'll have some Q&A, is biological variables. This is also scorable. Now, this is, it's described by NIH as biological variables such as sex, age, weight, and underlying health condition. Now, this is mostly focused, at least my experience recently, at every study section, it seems, and particularly the one that I'm on, there's always discussion about sex as a biological variable. So that's very important. So they give other examples, age, weight, but the one that reviewers tend to focus on, I think, the last few years is sex as a biological variable. And this applies for human studies and for animal studies. So this belongs in the approach. You absolutely have to address it. I mean, you just have to address it. It should be somewhat rare to exclude one sex. Now, there could be examples of that if you're studying Duchenne muscular dystrophy, if you're studying prostate cancer, or something specific in postmenopausal women. Of course, those could be examples where you're only studying one sex. But generally, for most proposals, you should be studying both males and females. And I think this has really evolved over time. I mean, for many years, a lot of proposals just tested, for example, male rats. Then, when it became an issue, I think it became an issue that females weren't being tested. And I think there was a time where, as long as you were also testing females, it was probably okay. But I think it's evolved past that. And I think many study sections, I think they want some text devoted to sex as a biological variable. So I don't think it's no longer enough to just simply say, we'll test males and females, or we'll test men and women. I think you really have to utilize some space and talk about sex as a biological variable, past literature, how it applies to what you're doing. If you're testing, a hypothesis on that, state that. So you have to devote some text to that. Now, this does not mean that every R01 has to have a sex comparison or look at sex differences, but you just have to address the topic in a satisfactory way. You can't say, or well, you can, but I don't think it's wise to say, for example, you'll test male rats, for instance, and then if you find a difference, well, then you'll test female rats. I don't think that kind of cuts it, to be quite honest. You can't say, or you shouldn't say. You could write what you want, but you get a worse score. That it will be too expensive to test both males and females. That's not appropriate. So anyway, those are the three: rigor of the prior research, scientific design, and biological variables. Those three areas of focus are scorable. The last one, which I wasn't going to discuss, is authentication. This is key biological and or chemical resources that are going to be used. This is a separate attachment to the grant. It's not scorable, so I wasn't going to discuss it. Now, it is still important, and you have to do it. But I thought our discussion should be focused on what's scorable. And I'll just come back to 3 points with all of this. One is grant writing. It's formulaic. Reviewers are used to seeing grants a certain way, so you should follow the quote formula. You can deviate, but be careful if you deviate from the standard way of writing a grant. 2, make it easy for reviewers. They have a lot of work to do, a lot of proposals to go through. And 3, just keep in mind that reviewers not only are giving you a score, but they're asked to list bullet points for strengths and weaknesses for each category that they're evaluating. So in your proposals, whenever you can utilize bullet points, I think that's helpful. And what I often do is I'll write a full paragraph, like for the significance of the innovation, and then, for example, at the bottom of the innovation, I'll have text and references and so forth. But at the end of the innovation section, I'll list a few bullet points. Therefore, this proposal is innovation because of bullet, 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 and it just makes it very easy for reviewers. So that's all I have. So, any questions or comments?
That's great. Thank you very much, Bill. That's wonderful. Yeah, it's been a little bit of a moving target, at least in sort of the study sections and things that I deal with, how reviewers were dealing with biological variables or interpreting premise. But I think NIH has articulated better what the expectations are, and study sections hone right in on them. So I think those are great points. I have seen, just again, when I look at a lot of preclinical testing and animal models. It's to your point about it's rare to exclude females. It's very rare now, and it's very difficult on some study panels to justify excluding female animals. So it takes a lot more thinking about how you design and what you'll be able to accomplish and what you'll be able to do. But those are excellent points.
Yeah, well, I agree. It is rare, and if you're going to exclude a section, I mean, you really better have a good reason.
Yeah. All right. Questions from the folks who are on the call for Dr. Farquhar? Don't forget to unmute. So Addie just got her grant. Who else is on?
Congratulations.
Yeah. Okay. So Eric, anything? Jessica? Are you guys writing grants for this summer coming up?
I'm waiting for my scores on the RO1 I submitted in February, and I feel I tried to integrate the rigor and reproducibility throughout the grant. I don't, in retrospect, I don't know if I did such a good job with, headings and making it easy to find it. But I also feel it's the first time submitting this grant, so I'll probably be submitting it again, and that'll be an area where I can improve upon. I felt this time I just need to get something of good quality out there, and then really get the comments back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think there's. I mean, of course, there's no rule that you have to have a separate paragraph, and probably the most important thing is that you have rigor built into everything you're doing, randomization, blinded analysis, and so forth. But it just makes it easy for the reviewers if, in addition to that, there's a paragraph where you summarize it. Because what happens is when the reviewer is presenting the application, whether it's a primary, secondary reviewer, I mean, the chair is now tasked to ask, how did they address rigor? How did they address sex as a biological variable? And sometimes reviewers forget to, I mean, I try to include it in my reviews in the text. So when I'm giving my quote report, I'm hitting on that. But if reviewers forget to put it in their written comments, they'll be asked about that on the fly. And if they're asked on the fly, it's always very nice if they could just, for the reviewer, if they could flip to that section and say, oh, they're addressing rigor. Look, they're doing blinded analysis, this, and this. And then there's, then the conversation moves on. If the reviewer has to kind of look around for stuff on the fly, that doesn't bode quite as well. So anyway, that's just a tip, and I think different strategies work for different study sections. But my recommendation would be have a separate paragraph addressing rigor.
We actually use call-out boxes, so it's formatted a little bit differently. But I've done it and I've seen it both ways. So the narrative, if you read it kind of linearly, there's after the paragraph there's a list, or the section starts with sort of a bullet-pointed list. Another effective thing that I've seen, and we've actually used this, is to put a separate box. So there's sort of the linear narrative, And this might help with some writing styles. And then almost like a separate figure that specifically is headed, sex as a biologic, or inclusion of females, or whatever you want to call the section, and then articulates the main points right there. It's great, and I hear this in Bill's comments too as a reviewer. But usually, what I'm trying to do is help, especially if I liked the grant, help the review, and it gets difficult. There's 30 grants in your head, and you're going to be discussing another one soon, and you want to make a point, and you have to flip through the paper that you're sitting or on your computer screen, and just being able to find it and lock into it and get it back in your head is extraordinarily helpful for the reviewers. Helps them help you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the boxes, I think that's a great, I haven't used that, but I think it's a great idea. Again, just to make it easy for the reviewers. And reviewers, again, they're not lazy. They have a lot, as you mentioned, there are a lot of proposals to go
Right?
through, and it's easy.
Yeah.
And it is easy to mix them up.
Yeah, it's easy to mix them up, and someone asks, or there's a discussion, or someone asks a question, and you just want to verify. There's a couple of grants that are similar, and you're trying to remember which one are we talking about. It sounds like an odd thing, but if it's not on your critique that you've typed up, and you can't find it quickly in the grant, and you start to fumble, you can feel the enthusiasm sort of draining away from the study section.
And it doesn't take much to go downhill.
Yeah. So one more quick question for Jess, or for any of the junior folks. Have you guys served on panels, or are you aware that you can sign up to be considered sort of as a junior investigator program to sit on NIH panels?
I am aware of that, although I thought that someone needed a certain number of papers out of their laboratory before they were eligible for that, where they were the senior author.
I don't know about that. I know the older system, you were sort of invited. Now there's an interface where you can go and apply, and it may vary SRO to SRO or study section to study section. But as long as you're aware of it, it's a great experience to be able to just go and participate, do some reviews, and see how reviews are actually managed in study section, because that's the audience you're writing for, is that group that's sitting around the table.
Yeah, and a lot of times reviewers look, they could be reviewing grants that are not right in their wheelhouse. And that happens. You get things that reviewers get stretched. Mm-hmm. And that's why communicating in a very easy fashion, very clear bullet points, is very important.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Farquhar. Any other final questions, comments, or announcements from the group? All right. As always, if anything comes up between now and next Thursday, let us know. Otherwise, we'll talk to you guys next Thursday morning. Let Aaron know, and let your friends, your colleagues know about that bylaws, right? Balancing your life and work stories session. I don't know how full it is, but it's going to fill up. And Dennis is fantastic. I know some of you have worked with him before.
Rob, I have a couple of questions about the INBRI RFA. Would you like to stay on the line after, or?
Sure.
Okay.
We can do it.